I met my husband, Robert, 6 years ago at a mutual friend's wedding. He was charming, attentive, and made me laugh in a way no one else ever had. From that moment on, we were inseparable. A year later, we were married, and for the most part, our life together had been idyllic. We shared dreams of starting a family, building a future, and growing old together. But, as I would later learn, Robert had a secret that would shatter the foundation of everything I thought I knew about our marriage. 3 years into our marriage, Robert had a brief affair with a woman named Stephanie. He confessed after she threatened to tell me herself, and it nearly destroyed us. I was devastated, but Robert promised it was a mistake, a lapse in judgment that he deeply regretted. He ended the relationship immediately and spent months earning back my trust through therapy, honesty, and patience. Against the advice of some friends and family, I chose to forgive him. We rebuilt our marriage, or so I thought. I never imagined Stephanie would resurface in our lives again, let alone at my baby shower. When I got pregnant, Robert was ecstatic. He attended every doctor's appointment, talked to my belly every night, and even helped plan my baby shower. It was supposed to be a joyous celebration, a time to feel loved and supported by friends and family as we prepared to welcome our child into the world. But the cracks in our seemingly perfect relationship had started to show long before the baby shower. A few months into my pregnancy, I noticed Robert had become increasingly distracted. He'd leave the room to take phone calls, his work trips seemed unusually frequent, and his phone was suddenly glued to his hand. When I asked about it, he always had a plausible explanation, and I tried to brush off my suspicions as hormonal paranoia. The baby shower was a collaborative effort between my sister, and my closest friends. They wanted everything to be perfect, from the pastel decorations to the custom cupcakes and baby-themed games. Robert played his part, too, helping coordinate the guest list and even surprising me with a stunning flower arrangement on the morning of the party. I was surrounded by love that day. My family and friends filled the room with laughter, excitement, and well wishes for our growing family. It was exactly the kind of moment I had dreamed of, until Stephanie walked in. I spotted her immediately. She was standing near the doorway, dressed impeccably and holding a gift bag. At first, I thought she was someone's plus one. But as she made her way across the room, her eyes locked on mine, and my stomach dropped. I froze, my mind racing. How did she know about the shower? Who had invited her? Before I could process it, she spoke loudly enough for the room to go silent. "Congratulations, Evelyn," she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "I just wanted to wish you the best with your new baby, and your husband." The room went deathly quiet. My sister immediately moved to intervene, but Stephanie raised her hand and continued. "You deserve to know the truth. Robert and I have been seeing each other for months. He told me he'd leave you after the baby was born." Gasps erupted around the room. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Robert, who had been standing near the refreshments table, looked pale as a ghost. He tried to speak, but no words came out. "Get out," my sister snapped, stepping between Stephanie and me. "You've done enough." Stephanie smirked, dropped the gift bag on the table, and walked out, leaving behind a room full of stunned faces and my shattered heart. The rest of the party was a blur. Guests awkwardly excused themselves, offering sympathetic glances as they left. My sister and a few close friends stayed to comfort me while Robert tried to explain himself. He swore up and down that Stephanie was lying, that she was trying to sabotage our marriage out of spite. But the look in his eyes told me there was more to the story. That night, after everyone had gone, I demanded the truth. Robert finally confessed that Stephanie's claims were partially true. He hadn't been seeing her for months, it had only been a few weeks, and he had ended it as soon as he realized she was becoming unhinged. He insisted he never promised to leave me and that he'd been trying to cut all ties with her when she found out about the baby. I didn't know what to believe. The betrayal was too fresh, the pain too raw. I asked him to leave the house that night, and he didn't fight me on it. For the first time in our marriage, I wasn't sure if we'd make it through. The next morning, I woke up to a flood of messages from friends and family. Some were supportive, others judgmental. Stephanie's name was on everyone's lips, and the humiliation was unbearable. My sister came over with coffee and pastries, insisting I take the day to rest and process everything. Robert, meanwhile, sent me a long text apologizing and begging for another chance. He promised to go back to therapy, to do whatever it took to make things right. But this time, I wasn't sure if I had it in me to forgive him. As I sat in the nursery, surrounded by tiny clothes and baby toys, I thought about the future. My baby deserved a stable, loving home, and I needed to decide whether that future included Robert or not. It's been weeks since the baby shower, and I'm still piecing my life back together. Robert and I are in counseling again, but this time, I'm approaching it with caution. I'm focusing on myself and my baby, putting my needs first for the first time in years. Whether or not our marriage survives remains to be seen, but one thing is certain, I'll never ignore my intuition again. Update 1. Nearly a month after the baby shower, I thought the worst was behind me. I was starting to find my footing, focusing on self-care and preparing for my baby's arrival. But then, Stephanie dropped another bombshell that shook me to my core. It started with a text message. The number was unfamiliar, but the message was unmistakable. "Evelyn, you deserve to know the whole truth. I'm pregnant, and it's Robert's baby." My heart stopped. I read and reread the message, hoping I had misunderstood. But there it was, plain as day. My hands were trembling as I dialed Robert's number. He picked up immediately, sounding hopeful, but I didn't give him a chance to speak. "She's pregnant. Is it true?" I asked, my voice cracking. There was a long pause. Then, in a barely audible voice, he admitted it. "I don't know for sure, but it's possible. I'm sorry, Evelyn. I didn't know she would do this." The walls felt like they were closing in on me. I couldn't breathe. I hung up the phone without another word and collapsed onto the couch. My sister found me an hour later, sobbing uncontrollably. Stephanie wasn't content with just sending me a text. Later, she showed up at my house unannounced. My sister intercepted her at the door. I heard the shouting from the living room and my sister threatening to call the police if she didn't leave. "I'm not leaving until Evelyn hears me out," Stephanie shot back. "She deserves to know the truth about the man she's married to." Against my sister's protests, I stepped outside. I needed answers. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger and exhaustion. "I want Robert to take responsibility," Stephanie said. "I'm keeping this baby, and he needs to step up. You should know who he really is." "I already know who he is," I snapped. "Now get off my property." My sister ushered her away, threatening to call the police if she didn't leave. But the damage was done. The stress of the confrontation sent me into a panic, and I felt a sharp pain in my abdomen. Moments later, my water broke. I was rushed to the hospital, terrified for my baby. It was too early, I was only 35 weeks along. The doctors rushed me into the maternity ward, monitoring both me and the baby closely. The stress and emotional upheaval of the past few days had likely triggered my early labor, and all I could do was hope that my child would be safe. My sister stayed by my side, holding my hand and reassuring me through the contractions. I couldn't bring myself to call Robert at first, but my sister eventually took my phone and let him know what was happening. He arrived at the hospital within an hour, looking disheveled and panicked. "Evelyn, I'm so sorry," he said as he stepped into the room. His voice cracked with emotion, but I couldn't bear to look at him. I was too angry, too hurt, and too focused on the life I was about to bring into the world. The labor was complicated but manageable. After several hours of pain and fear, my baby boy was born. He was small, fragile, and needed to be taken to the NICU immediately, but the doctors assured me he was strong and would likely make a full recovery. Seeing him for the first time, even through the haze of exhaustion, brought tears to my eyes. He was perfect, and for a moment, nothing else mattered. The next morning, I woke up in my hospital room to find Robert sitting by my bed. He looked like he hadn't slept, his face etched with guilt and concern. "I need to explain," he began softly. "I've made so many mistakes, Evelyn, but I love you and our son more than anything. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." I didn't respond right away. My mind was swirling with everything that had happened, the betrayal, the humiliation, and now the uncertainty of our future. "What about Stephanie?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She called me this morning," Robert admitted. "She's keeping the baby, but I've made it clear that my priority is you and our family. I'll handle my responsibilities to her child, but I want to be here for you, for us." The thought of co-parenting with his mistress made my stomach churn. "I don't know if I can do this, Robert," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I don't know if I can trust you again, or if I even want to try." My sister arrived shortly after, sensing the tension in the room. She suggested Robert leave so I could rest and process everything, and for once, he didn't argue. He kissed my forehead, whispered another apology, and left the room. The days that followed were some of the most challenging of my life. Between visiting my son in the NICU and grappling with the chaos Robert had brought into our lives, I felt like I was barely holding on. But with my sister's support and the love of my friends and family, I started to find moments of clarity. I knew I needed to make a decision about my marriage, but I also knew it wasn't one I could rush. For now, my focus was on my son and giving him the best possible start in life. As for Robert and Stephanie, their drama would have to take a back seat, at least until I was ready to face it head-on. This wasn't the life I had envisioned, but it was the one I had. And for the sake of my son, I was determined to make the best of it. Update 2. The days after my son's birth were some of the hardest I'd ever endured, but they also brought clarity. The betrayal, humiliation, and endless stress had taken enough from me. I decided it was time to take control of my narrative, not let Robert or Stephanie define my future. While I focused on my son's recovery in the NICU, my sister took it upon herself to dig into Stephanie's story. Something about her didn't add up. Her sudden appearance at the baby shower, the dramatic pregnancy reveal, it all felt too calculated. My sister started with social media, piecing together a timeline of Stephanie's life over the past year. What she found was heartbreaking and infuriating. Stephanie's social media revealed that she had been in an unstable relationship with a man who was clearly toxic. There were veiled posts about being trapped with someone who wouldn't step up and vague complaints about feeling unsupported. My sister also uncovered that Stephanie's boyfriend had a reputation for being a deadbeat, unemployed, irresponsible, and nowhere near ready to become a parent. It all began to make sense. Stephanie's sudden reappearance in our lives wasn't about love or even revenge. She was desperate. She saw Robert, with his stable career and willingness to take responsibility, as her escape plan. By making him believe he was the father, she was trying to secure a better future for herself and her unborn child. With my sister's help, I hired a lawyer and a private investigator. If Stephanie was playing dirty, I could play smarter. The investigator uncovered that Stephanie had lied about the timing of her pregnancy. All evidence pointed to her being further along than she'd claimed, making it impossible for Robert to be the father. When I confronted Robert with the evidence, he was floored. For the first time in months, he seemed to truly understand the mess his actions had created, not just for me, but for himself as well. He vowed to take responsibility for the hurt he had caused and agreed to let me handle Stephanie on my terms. I invited Stephanie to meet me at a local cafe. She arrived with a nervous smile, clearly expecting me to beg for answers or offer her some kind of deal. Instead, I slid the medical records across the table, my expression unreadable. "This isn't Robert's baby," I said plainly. "And you knew it all along?" Stephanie's face fell, her mask of confidence cracking. "I didn't have a choice," she said, her voice trembling. "The father is a loser. He can't even hold down a job, let alone raise a baby. I thought Robert would be a better father, a better provider. I just wanted my baby to have a chance." Her words, while pitiful, didn't soften my resolve. "I understand wanting the best for your child," I replied. "But dragging my family into your mess was cruel and selfish. You've done enough damage, and it ends now." Stephanie tried to plead with me, but I held firm. "Stay out of my life. And if you try to contact me or Robert again, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you've done, including your boyfriend." Her shoulders slumped, and she finally left, defeated. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. With Stephanie out of the picture, I turned my attention to Robert. I told him I needed time to think and asked him to move out while I focused on myself and my son. Over the next few months, I worked with a therapist, reconnected with old friends, and rediscovered the strength I thought I'd lost. Robert worked hard to prove himself, attending individual therapy, taking full accountability, and giving me the space I needed. But I knew that forgiveness, if it came, would be on my terms. 6 months later, my son was thriving, and so was I. Robert and I were co-parenting amicably, but I had chosen to prioritize my independence and happiness. I wasn't ready to reconcile, and I wasn't sure if I ever would. As for Stephanie, she disappeared from our lives entirely. Word eventually got out that her boyfriend had abandoned her shortly after learning she'd tried to pass the baby off as Robert's. She was now left to navigate the consequences of her actions on her own. Standing in my son's nursery one evening, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be.